A 21-year-old girl stood in front of the president of a nation, holding a piece of paper that didn't even exist a week earlier, and she couldn't stop her hand from shaking. That's how you know something real just happened. Stay with me for the next few minutes, because what unfolded inside that palace hall on the evening of July 13th, 2026, is not just a sports story. It's the story of an entire country realizing, in real time, that it had no idea how to honor someone who had just become impossible to ignore. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why the president himself admitted on camera that they had to improvise the entire ceremony, because nothing like it had ever been written down before. Before we go further, if stories like this move you even a little, do one thing for me right now. Hit that subscribe button. Not because I'm asking for a favor, but because there are people out there quietly working, quietly climbing, quietly breaking barriers nobody prepared them for, and their stories deserve to be told properly, without being buried under algorithms and noise. Every subscription tells me that this kind of storytelling matters, that it's worth continuing, that somewhere out there someone is waiting for the next one of these. So if this is the kind of content that makes you feel something, don't scroll past it. Subscribe now, because what I'm about to tell you next is going to make you understand exactly why this moment mattered so much. Her name is Alexandra Eala, world number 28, the highest ranking any Filipino has ever reached in professional tennis history. And just 9 days before she stood in that ceremonial hall, she was on the grass of Wimbledon's center court doing something that shouldn't have been possible on paper. She faced a defending champion, a former world number one, in front of a crowd that expected the champion to win comfortably. Instead, Eala took the first set in a brutal tiebreak that stretched to 9 points, then closed out the second set with authority. The stadium didn't know what it was watching, neither did the rest of the world, until the scoreline hit every sports wire within minutes. She advanced to the round of 16, a depth of a Grand Slam tournament no Filipino man or woman had ever reached before her. Her next opponent, a top 20 Italian player, eventually stopped her run in 3 hard-fought sets. But by then, it didn't matter. She had already rewritten what was considered possible. She flew home, and within days, the ranking updated, 28th in the world, a number that looked almost unreal next to her country's flag. And here's where the story stops being just about tennis, because 9 days later, she was summoned to the palace, Malacanang, the seat of power in the Philippines. She walked in expecting recognition. What she didn't expect was for the president to stand beside her and, half laughing, admit there was no existing protocol for honoring someone like her. They didn't have a ready-made ceremony for a tennis player who had climbed this high, because the country had simply never produced one before. So they built the moment from scratch, just so they'd have a reason to stand next to her and mark the occasion properly. Now pause with me here for a second, because this is where it gets emotional, and I promise you, the next part is going to explain something that even most of the news coverage completely missed. When it was her turn to speak, she didn't talk about rankings or trophies. She talked about her grandfather, her first coach, the man she called Papa Lolo, who used to walk her and her brother to the courts after school, back when she was just a kid with ruffled socks, light-up shoes, and chubby cheeks. That image, delivered in a room full of state cameras and formal dignitaries, hit people in a way nobody anticipated. It spread across social media within the hour. Because it wasn't performance. It was a girl placing the child she used to be right next to the woman the entire nation was suddenly celebrating. And then something happened that almost never happens in ceremonies like this. The president stopped being a head of state for a moment and admitted he was simply a fan. He told her, on record, that he was gushing, that he hoped one day to watch her play in person, even outside a Grand Slam, even just to watch her practice. He praised not just her success, but the humility with which she carried it. And then he said the line that would end up defining the entire evening, telling her that she reminded the nation what kind of people they could be, and that all 110 million of them were behind her. He didn't stop there either. He made a public pledge on camera, entered into the record, that whatever support she needed going forward, the state would provide it. That's a real commitment, made by a real head of state, in front of real cameras. But stay with me, because there's a deeper layer here that most people are missing entirely, and it's the part one think you'll find most fascinating. This wasn't a lucky spike. This wasn't one good tournament. If you trace her season backward, you'll find a plateau built brick by brick over 18 months. Earlier in the year, she broke into the top 50 for the first time. She won her first smaller professional title, then a second one, beating her own doubles partner in the final. Her win-loss record for the year sat comfortably in her favor, with career prize money for the season creeping toward $1.3 million. This is not the profile of someone who got hot for 2 weeks. This is a profile of a player whose ceiling nobody has found yet. And that uncertainty, that not knowing how high she can still climb, is exactly what makes the next part of her story so tense to watch unfold. Because here's the thing that makes this so much bigger than one ceremony. Tennis, historically, has sat outside the national sporting identity in the Philippines. Boxing had its icon. Weightlifting had its Olympic hero. Basketball had decades of infrastructure behind it. Tennis had promising juniors who never broke through to this level. Never a singles player who forced the sport's official global rankings to display her country's flag next to a number this small. And that changes things in ways that aren't just symbolic. It changes what parents tell their children about which sports are worth pursuing. It changes whether courts get rebuilt, whether academies get funded, whether budgets shift. A public pledge from a president is one thing. Whether it turns into real infrastructure over the next year is a completely different question, and that's a thread we're going to keep pulling on in future videos. So, if you want to see how that unfolds, you already know what button to hit. But if you think this story is a straight line of triumph, it isn't. And this next part is honestly the piece that makes everything else hit harder. Just 6 months before she stood in that palace, she had walked onto the very same courts where her grandfather first coached her as the emotional headline act of a home tournament. And she lost in the quarterfinal. She had dedicated that tournament to her grandfather's memory, and losing on the exact courts he taught her on, in front of the country she was trying to make proud, was reportedly one of the hardest moments of her entire season. 6 months later, she stood in the state ceremonial hall and spoke those same courts by name in front of the president of her nation. That's not a redemption story wrapped up neatly in a bow. It's something longer and messier than that. It's what happens when a career has enough runway to survive its own worst days. So here's where we come back to that frozen moment we opened with, a framed citation in her hands. Her voice thick with emotion, she said she doesn't normally show. A president smiling, because the ceremony he built from nothing turned out to be smaller than the person it was meant to honor. And here's the part that should keep you thinking long after this video ends. This isn't really a story about one girl, or one trophy, or one ranking number. It's a story about a country discovering, in real time, what its own athletes are capable of at an altitude it never had a name for before. And the story is not finished, not even close. In less than 2 weeks from that ceremony, she's scheduled to step onto the court again at a major tournament in Washington, this time carrying something heavier than a racket. She's carrying a citation written specifically for her, a public promise of national support now on permanent record, and a memory of a room that invented its own ritual, because there was simply nothing else that fit. What happens next, whether that promise turns into real courts and real funding, whether her ranking keeps climbing, whether she reaches even further at the next Grand Slam, that's the part nobody can predict yet. And that uncertainty is exactly why you need to stay close to this channel, because the next chapter of the story is coming, and you do not want to miss how it unfolds. If this story moved you even slightly, subscribe now, turn on notifications, and let's watch what she does next together.